Hello guys, welcome to another video, and this one I'm going to be talking about some major takeaways from the Q&A that came out from the reveal, just after the reveal yesterday. Of course, we've had the huge reveal for patch 0.5 for part of Exile 2, and it was seriously a huge reveal. There was just so much information jam-packed into that one live stream reveal there, and basically just information overload. And then to follow up that, we had a very long Q&A as well, with tons of information just packed away there as well. So, if you're one of those people who have just watched the reveal, maybe you haven't watched the Q&A yet, or perhaps you were waiting for, some major takeaways from that Q&A, in this video I'm just going to be discussing 3 really big changes that are actually coming up in the upcoming patch in 0.5 that they've actually confirmed to be coming in this patch, and there's a few extra things tucked away in the Q&A as well, where they kind of discussed very hot topics and talked about their philosophy on those, which we'll also get onto towards the end of this video. So let's get straight into it with skill gem level modifiers. This was one of the earlier questions that Ziggy D asked Jonathan and Mark in that Q&A, and they had a little bit to say about this one. They basically said that they've discussed this internally, and they are going to do some changes in this patch, but they kind of alluded to the fact that there's not that much balance going on in this upcoming update, and they're not really too happy with the exact state of things going forward here. And there is a bit of a gap here between 0.5 and patch 1.0, which we already know is coming at the end of the year. It's probably going to be launching in December, and that gap is going to be used primarily for kind of getting the things that are currently in the game in the right place. They said that they're less interested in kind of looking towards adding new content and more focused on actually balancing the current state of the game and all of the things that are already in the game. And on the topic of skill gem level modifiers, Mark said that basically in this upcoming patch in 0.5, they're going to make some changes where they are bringing the top end of those modifiers down, and then they're shifting the modifiers up in tiers. So for example, here's a list of the gem level modifiers that you can get on a crossbow, which is a two-handed martial weapon, and you've got, the very low level gem level modifier there at level 2, begins appearing at item level 2 for plus 2 gem levels, and we scale all the way up to a level 81 minimum modifier for plus 7 gem levels, and you can see that the weighting here with these red circles, it goes down, so it's much harder to actually get these high gem level modifiers when you're, rolling normally for modifier types. But of course, there is the perfect essence of battle, which did get nerfed last league down to plus 5 gem levels on these two-handed martial weapons, but even at plus 5 gem levels, that's enough with a good weapon to do all of the content in the game, or at least it was in the previous patch, and we'll have to wait and see exactly how hard the new content is going to be, but I assume it's probably going to be still enough in the upcoming patch. But what Mark says here is that they're going to lower these top-end modifiers for less gem levels, and then they're going to shift all of these up. Now, what I think this means is that we're probably not going to see plus 7 on two-handers anymore. I think the maximum will be plus 6, or probably more likely plus 5. So what I expect to see here is that this plus 2 level of projectile skills here, for example on this crossbow, would be changed to a plus 1 level modifier at item level 2, and then the plus 3 would be plus 2, and then you'd have plus 3. This one would probably be changed to a non-variable plus 4. And then the highest level modifier, which is currently plus 7, will likely go down to plus 5. And that will mean that the perfect essence of battle will have to be nerfed again. So this currently provides 5 gem levels, and I expect in the new patch this will probably be changed to plus 3 levels. Maybe plus 4, but I think they kind of want to make it so that this is still very rare to get, even if it's at plus 5. And so they don't really want the perfect essence of battle there to be, very close to that. So it will probably go down to plus 3. It may be the case that they've lowered the top modifier only to 6, just to see how that works. But I think that is not that much of a change. And I think people will be kind of hungry for a bigger change there. So perhaps it will go down a couple of gem levels. Overall, I think that this is going to have a little bit of impact in terms of player power level, for build kind of power level, in terms of damage output. This is going to have an impact, but the general kind of problem that this is causing with, what gear you actually choose and what gear you feel like you can't choose, more specifically, things like unique weapons, that's not really going to have a huge impact, because you're still going to want a crossbow that has, plus 3 or plus 4 gem levels, because that's still a huge amount of damage, compared to a lot of these, unique crossbow options, or even just generally any unique weapon type options, which don't have those gem level modifiers, and they're just generally not as strong. With that said though, there is a thing in this patch where you're able to upgrade unique weapons into a endgame version. We saw that in the reveal, so perhaps some of those will be able to compete with crafted weapons going forward. Now next up in the list of changes in the Q&A there is defense changes, specifically armor and evasion defense changes. So they discussed how they found out in their internal testing that players basically were not having anywhere near as much defense as they thought they would be having in sort of mid to late game builds. And there was a lot of different reasoning for that. Mark said that it could be the fact that a lot of the nodes on the tree where you kind of want to invest into, armor or evasion scaling are just bad. He said that they're bad options and often a waste of your points, which means that you don't spec into them, so your actual scaling in terms of your evasion and armor totals is going to be lower than what they would expect, because they did expect people to kind of invest into those a little bit more, and they said that just wasn't the case, that wasn't happening. And so their plan is to improve the amount of armor and evasion you'll be able to get on an average character build by boosting the base types for those particular stats. So beginning around Act 3, you will start to see higher base types providing more of those defenses, and that will scale through towards the end game. So even if you're not investing in, as much armor and evasion scaling, or perhaps you have the same amount of scaling as you did before, you'll still have a higher amount of base defenses, and they want to kind of lean into that a little bit more to be able to enable pure armor or pure evasion or hybrid builds. They also went on to mention that they are nerfing some things around the recovery of Energy Shield. So Energy Shield currently, they're still not very happy with how the recovery is working there, specifically in terms of recharge. They think it's a little bit too strong, so they're going to be nerfing some things. There wasn't any specifics to exactly what they're nerfing there. They just said that they weren't very happy with the recovery, and there's going to be some changes there. And then Mark went into this huge run where he just went off on, all of the different defensive mechanisms and things like that. Very big run. Got lots of different things in there. So one of the things he mentioned to begin with there is deflection. Talks about how the deflection stat is currently too rewarding on a low investment and not rewarding enough on a high investment. So that is something that they'd like to change. Didn't get a confirmation there as to whether that's changing in this patch or in a future patch, but I guess if he said it in the Q&A, he probably wants to try and get it into 0.5. Then he talks about armor applying to elemental damage, and he said how he'd like to see more of that on the tree in different places, so not just isolated to the strength area, but more of it kind of spread out, likely on the armor energy shield section of the tree, and also through to the armor evasion section of the tree, just more access in general. And Mark also kind of talked about the armor evasion hybrid nodes, said that they were a bit too conditional. He thought that they're most of the time not really worth investing into. So he wants to kind of improve the ability to actually use, hybrid armor evasion gear pieces and actually spec into that as a full defensive archetype. So there's going to be some general buffs there. And he also went on to discuss how hybrid evasion energy shield builds are so much stronger than pure evasion. The example he gave there was a character with 1,000 energy shield and then some evasion scaling with Ghost Dance compared to a character with just pure evasion scaling, saying how it's just so much stronger than that other option there of just going pure evasion. And he alluded to some Ghost Dance nerfs there, but nothing too specific. Lastly, in that run, Mark talked about armor energy shield builds, and he said that this is actually the highest death rate. I think he said over 300% more deaths are on armor energy shield comparatively to any other defensive archetype. So that is kind of interesting to think about. I guess in the last patch we did kind of have a bit more of an introduction of this archetype, so perhaps there was a lot of experimentation going on with, the different shape-shifting builds and things like that. Of course, we had the Druid. So perhaps part of it is that, but Mark just said there's going to be some more global buffs here to that defensive. Nothing too specific, but more kind of global buffs to allow people to actually invest into that defensive setup a little bit more. Now, after the huge kind of defensive run that Mark went on there, they actually moved on to another topic, and this is another big takeaway from this Q&A, which is something really big that's changing in this upcoming patch, and that is Leech. Leech is getting nerfed big time in this patch. And Leech, they discussed it quite a bit there. It's become really problematic in PoE 2. Initially, when they moved from the PoE 1 system to PoE 2, they ditched the PoE 1 system because they thought it was a little bit too complex. There was just kind of too many things going on there. And PoE 1 system does have a lot of stats and kind of weird scaling going on. But PoE 2 system has posed its own problems over time. And the way how Leech currently works in PoE 2 is that you basically deal a hit of damage, and then, based on that damage type, the monster then takes damage, and you have a leech percentage. So, for example, you could have a percentage of your physical damage, which you leech, or it could be a percentage of your elemental damage or chaos damage. And based on your damage type that the monster actually takes, you then leech that percentage over 1 second. And you can have any number of leech stacks active at once, but leech is immediately removed when the actual resource that it's recovering is completely topped off, unless you have some kind of over-leech modifier. Now, there's also something else going on there with Leech, which is the leech resistance on monsters, which is a kind of hidden stat that players can't actually see. Mark talks about that a little bit, saying how they kind of put that in there in the first place to have situations where, you're hitting maybe 10 or 20 white monsters at once with one hit. They wanted to make it so that was kind of comparable to hitting a single rare monster or maybe a unique, so you got, roughly the same Leech. But Leech overall has become a bit problematic in PoE 2 because you can essentially abuse this system on really, really high-end builds to just get near infinite recovery. You can recover way, way too much because you deal so much damage and have so much damage output, just consistent damage output, that you just immediately top off your life bar or your ES or whatever kind of recovery you're having. Just every single frame, any damage you take, you'd immediately top off back to full. So, they're going to be changing Leech in this patch, and how it's going to work now is that there's only going to be one active Leech source at a time, and that's whatever the highest source is. So, let's say you deal, 10 or 20 hits in the space of 1 second, only the highest instance of Leech will recover at any one time. And if this works anything like any of the similar mechanics in PoE 1, all of the Leech instances will still exist on your character, but only the highest one will actually recover at a time. So as soon as that highest one drops off, as soon as it expires, the next highest one will then replace it, and so on and so forth. Now, to add to that, they're also going to be adding a cap on the damage that Leech will actually consider. So at some point, you will have so much damage that adding more damage will not mean more recovery. There will be a cap placed on it. We don't know what this cap is going to be, but whatever that cap is, at some point you will not be able to improve your recovery through increasing your damage, and instead the only option you'll have to actually improve your recovery from Leech is by investing into more Leech percentage. So the more you actually get, the more of a percentage of the damage the monster actually takes from your hit that you have as Leech, that will improve your recovery. And they discussed how this new system should make it so that Leech is more consistent across the board, where, you'll be able to just, hit a white monster, for example, and you'll get the same amount of Leech as you would from a rare monster or a unique monster. They kind of want it to feel a little bit more reliable, but also not completely out of control. So this is a really big change because, just generally speaking, the current system, the way how it is in the game prior to the 0.5 patch, it's basically really abusable by very strong builds. We've seen, things like the Comet chain builds where they're just constantly triggering Comet over and over again. Those builds basically cannot die because as long as they can't get one shot, they're always fully recovering their resource, in every single frame. So that is just extremely strong. And with the new system, that won't really be a thing. You'll have a maximum cap on the amount of Leech you can get at a, baseline based on a damage cap. And then you'll have to actually actively invest into more Leech percentage to get more recovery. So that'll be interesting to experience exactly what that feels like in-game. So that's something you can look out for, when the new patch drops. You can kind of see how that new Leech system functions and see how it feels to play around with. Now, those are the three major takeaways in terms of changes coming in 0.5, but there were two hot topics that were discussed in this Q&A which are not really receiving changes in this patch, but they did discuss them in a bit of detail. The first one is increased item rarity modifiers, of course, on gear. Another hot topic, that one is kind of right there alongside the skill gem level modifiers, and rarity seems to be unchanged in this upcoming patch, but Jonathan does hope that the reward agency that the new endgame provides will kind of help offset rarity affecting currency a little bit, because he mentioned how, you'd be able to kind of target farm specific things that are valuable, like for example omens and things like that, to kind of offset the increase in the amount of currency in the economy. So whether that actually pans out or not is anyone's guess, but that is what Jonathan hopes will happen. The other topic there is life not on the tree. Of course, this has been something else that people have been discussing a lot, the whole kind of life versus energy shield thing. Now, Mark did discuss here how internally they see energy shield as comparable to armor and evasion as a defense type, rather than as kind of an extension of your life or as a competing resource against life, which is kind of not really how it's used in the game right now, but that's how they see it internally, and they kind of want to get the game into a better place where they can actually view it as that rather than, you know, the whole life versus ES thing. And they want to kind of fix defenses first at a baseline. That's kind of part of what they're doing with the whole armor and evasion stuff and nerfing the recovery on energy shield and things like that. And they want to see how that pans out in this patch before they actually consider things like life on the tree. They did say that it's not off the table, so it's not something that they're completely dismissing and that it's never going to happen. But Mark, as of right now in that Q&A, still said he preferred that it's not on the tree. So that is something that may change in the future, but as of right now, they want to kind of flesh out defenses a little bit more, have them a little bit more balanced, and see how that goes in the game. But that is it. That's the kind of core Q&A takeaways there for me for those specific changes. There was a whole lot of other stuff going on in the Q&A. It was quite a long discussion, but I wanted to kind of highlight those things as quite big mechanical changes that may affect the meta in a big way coming up in the patch. You know, things like the defensive changes, things like the skill gem level modifiers, and the Leech especially. I feel like they're going to have quite a big impact on what people actually want to play in the upcoming patch and what people end up playing after they get to experience those new mechanics. But we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.